Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Fairs. It's impressive. My name is Melissa Fathman. I'm the Executive Director of the Dairy Arts Center here in Boulder, and I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today's date is Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. Panel time is 9 a.m. Panel title is Art in the Open, a Catalyst for Community. Before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, and consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So thank you, and once again, welcome to CWA and today's discussion. We ask that all attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, doesn't seem like we're going to have that in this group, but are not permitted. You never know. I mean, my husband's here, he's a little rabble-rouser. No, just kidding. But just to know that time will be allotted for questions toward the end. But feel free to jot them down now, because I really want you to respond to any portion of what you hear today. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So write them on the cards that I think you've received, and then raise your hand when you're ready, and then we have student producers in the room that will collect your cards and bring them to me. So now it's time to meet our panelists. So I'm going to ask each of them actually to introduce themselves. And there are full bios on the website. I highly recommend, if you haven't already done this, to go on there and look at all the wonderful things that they've done and their experiences and skills. But I've asked them to, in addition to sort of introducing themselves in general, include some experiences that relate in some way to our topic. So we'll start with Lynn.
Mine took a harder touch. So. Hi there, everyone. My name is Lynn Warshevsky. I'm really thrilled to be here and to be talking about public art, and in particular, arts engagement and how the arts can be used to foster, I think, dialogue and community. In terms of my own background, I have been engaged in creative development, specifically with young people, for most of my working life, and am the founder and former executive director, so that is, I think 30 years was probably enough, of a media arts organization that worked with young people and still works and still thrives and survives with young people in Los Angeles, so photography, filmmaking, animation, et cetera. And our practices are very much grounded in participatory practices, participatory storytelling, something I always feel that I need to say in the age of technology and digital tools and whatnot that we're now engaged in. When we started, we were using film. So it was at a time when the capacity for a young person, especially very low income and marginalized in other ways, did not have easy access to uplifting their own stories or the stories of their communities. So that even as we entered into the digital space and using digital technologies for art making, that commitment to creativity and storytelling and uplift always remained constant. What I would say about that also is that participatory practices have really grown within the public arts space. And they might range from anything from planning and how community is engaged in the planning of arts installations to artist selection, to creation, and this is where I've done the most work, is bringing artists and young people, but other community members as well, together to create works that then become a part of the public space, either as temporary or permanent installations, and then, or to collaborate with artists. I've worked in projects with that where we brought artists and community members together to co-collaborate, and then obviously installation and maintenance. I want to say that although my work has been focused in film and photo-based multimedia, still image and audio storytelling, that obviously public art extends well beyond that. We all know about murals. I was doing some reading in preparation for coming here today, and do you know the city that is considered kind of the public art capital of America? Say again? You don't know? Okay. Sculptures. And Nashville? Oh, nationally, yes, sorry, yeah. Philadelphia.
Wow.
Miami, though, is maybe, depending on what you're reading, is pretty high in the list there. It's known as the City of Murals. I think they have somewhere around 4,000 murals, probably more. They regularly engage, and this is specific to a particular art form, and I'm aware of that, they regularly engage community members to produce new murals, so artists working with community every year, so there is that commitment on the part of the city. But there's more, and murals and mosaics and sculptures, of course, amazing, but also we don't want to forget that there's music, that there's performance, theater, dance, and all other other digital space, video, so that really the opportunities for public arts and public arts engagement cross all disciplines of art making from my point of view. And I will stop there and hand it to Seth.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. And first of all, just thank you for being here. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm glad that we're here having this conversation together. And I think that's such a great place to start, is this idea of the togetherness and the participatory aspect of this. I was reflecting on the topic, and it made me think of where I started, and that was as a trained composer, coming up, learning from teachers who were from the modernist tradition. And if you're not aware, it contains individuals like Milton Babbitt, who famously published, this is a convoluted story, but he has an article that says, "Who cares if you listen?" Which is it was a bit of a bait and switch. It wasn't his original title, but But I think it really highlights this idea of isolation and elitism, and sort of like the composer as, you know, I can do this by myself and I don't need an audience. And as I reflected on that, I thought how far my own journey has come in that kind of starting point of being sort of that kind of alone, and whatever art I make is sufficient on its own, to now I feel like nothing matters unless an audience is there. So, and in so many ways, most of the work that I've done, either as the creator or as a curator, educator, doesn't work without an audience. It requires the audience to really complete the full kind of interactive loop that we're designing. So like I said, I'm an artist. I would consider myself a composer still, but also I've done plenty of work in intermedia, specifically interactive artwork. I use technology quite a bit, but I'm also highly critical of the use of technology. And in fact, some of my earliest explorations with it involved really probing the problematic uses of technology. As an example, I did a public installation that this was early days Facebook that exploited a privacy loophole where the audience members' personal data that was accessible through this loophole was kind of like publicly shown in different, I pulled all of their images that were publicly available. I stated all of their publicly available like information about them. It was highly exposing, in other words. I don't know how I feel about that now. I feel like maybe that was a bit problematic as well. But so kind of probing technology for its like idiomatic usage in public art has been important to me. But more and more these days, I find myself focusing, as I said, a curator, educator, and encouraging the next generation of students to explore their own expression as manifested in the public space. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work in many capacities, starting music festivals, sound art festivals, all involving students. And I'll put a pin in this and come back to this later in the panel, but critically involving public and private partnerships in order to do so. And I feel like that, for me, has really, I guess, percolated to the top as the most meaningful, biggest impact with the longest lasting effect is these partnerships with community organizations. And I see the ramifications in student careers and success and ongoing artistic endeavors. And so anyway, I'll come back to that later at the end. I think that's where I'll pause for now. Thanks.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for being here. I'm going to continue on Seth's path. I'm also trained as a composer. I wrote some symphonies and stuff like that. And also I realized I was part of the first generation after the Second World War composers. Our teachers were Second World War people. And the music came into a very intellectual and very elitist, the academic music, in which only ourselves would listen to our own music. And it was very technical. And I was also trained as a graphic designer because my parents didn't want me to study music. And that graphic design has taken my career in very beautiful directions. I'm now a sound artist and a visual artist and a performer. And my work was inclined always to care about social justice and spirituality and community, which I didn't learn in the conservatory. I went completely in the opposite direction, and they kind of gave me their blessing. Goodbye. And it's great. I mean, it's I've done a lot with building sonic devices out of immigrant belongings from the U.S.-Mexico border. And the latest years, I've been working a lot with in residencies in universities with students and non-musicians, building up sound and choral pieces. I come from the tradition of Pauline Oliveros, that Seth knows also. Pauline Oliveros was very supportive of my work, and I admire from her attachment to community and chanting. And Pauline Oliveros, she has this concept that is called deep listening. That is incredible. And I've been doing things like unearthing sound from historical sites, indigenous sites, with students. And well, I don't know. I just love to be around Seth and Lynn and Melissa. And I would like to just follow the conversation about how we can make music less, or the academic music less elitist and more part of the community.
I feel like we could have an entire conversation with each one of these people. It's incredible background and skills and interests, and so we'll do our best in the time we have. I wanted to, and each of you interestingly kind of touched on this, but I wanted to kind of start with what does it mean to be public art, actually? You know, public, private. I mean, the most extreme version of private would be like a billionaire who has art and he opens a foundation to get a tax write-off and 5 people get to look at it, you know, over to a sculpture in the middle of a, you know, a city park or something like that. But there's all kinds of things in between, you know, that each of you have touched upon. You know, at the Derry Arts Center, we're open to the public, we're free, you can come in and look at it, but are there barriers to even going through the door? So that's one thing. And then also, I was going to say this to the end. I told you guys I have a slightly controversial question. Jump in. And this actually came from an artist I was talking to. I think a lot of government entities think, oh, well, if we have public art, we invest in that, we're kind of done. We've done our art thing, you know. But for the artists who have other mediums where it's not sculpture, it is theater or music or, you know, other kinds of expressions that they want to engage with the public. But how do we do that in a public way? What does that even mean? Is it free? Is it out in the wild, as I like to say? So just kind of getting us started in that way. Yeah.
I'd like to say.
Okay.
You know, first of all, when I think about public art, although obviously there are wonderful arts organizations that really strive to be very accessible to the community, I do think of public art as art more broadly into the shared public space. And I think you're actually exactly right that in terms of governmental efforts to promote public art in communities, and so, for example, a really common strategy across the nation is the Percent for the Arts program. And in some states, that means a percent for, usually it's 1%, it might be higher, it might be 1 to 2%. In the capital costs related to public buildings, and then there might be municipalities, for example, where I live in Los Angeles, there's another Percent for the Arts program that has to do with private development. So all private commercial development over $500,000. The percentage, it's the total cost or square footage, I don't know the exact formula, but whichever is less. And I think what happens a lot is that people, is that the governmental entities are most engaged in creating that art that then doesn't provide space for other kind of artistic engagement or any kind of ongoing effort. The people who do that are usually the people who are working in the community-based and nonprofit organizations. Sometimes there's partnership and sometimes there's not. I've seen a lot that it would be great if there were partnership and a real strategy between that public sector who has that ability to fund the acquisition and installation of arts, but there could be much more engagement of the community, even in that effort, let alone in the ongoing production of music or poetry or theater, or I don't think of those as ephemeral arts, but maybe in the context that we're speaking, they are. And it seems to me that that's really important in terms of keeping people also engaged, whether it's art that's installed or other forms of art, to keep communities connected to what's been placed or what is being experienced in their community. They're only going to do that through some relationship to the art process. So, yeah. Others?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about some of the things you said, which are really fascinating. The idea of like ephemeral art, and I feel like I'm so attracted to the idea of ephemeral art, and I wonder if it's like, is it antithetical to public art? I don't know, but what I would say about like your first question, like what is public art? You know, whenever I'm thinking of questions related to like kind of fundamental principles, I always find myself going back to history. Like, where did this idea come from? And I'm by no means an art historian, so this is just total armchair research. But you know, I think some touch points include like the Roman circus, right? This idea of all of these kind of performers, some of them violent, coming together in this like public sphere, and it's chaotic, it's entertaining, and it's it's bringing together all of these different trades and arts. I also think of like religious practice as being a kind of public art as well, you know, kind of tracing it back to, at least in like the Judeo-Christian thread, to like the Ark of the Covenant being walked around, right? So there's like procession, a parade, but then expanding that, of course, with like costuming, although maybe we wouldn't call it costuming, but like, you know, textile art, singing, so like either, you know, voice alone or adding, you know, early instruments to that, and then, you know, grows into this elaborate church music tradition. And then, you know, fast forwarding, you know, way forward in music history, think of composers like Richard Wagner, who bring together all of these arts and comes up with this, you know, elaborate German word, Gesamtkunstwerk, like the all-encompassing artwork, right? Which I find incredibly inspirational and such a great touch point for our discussion today, because, I mean, Wagner is such a hugely problematic and racist person, but when he was composing operas, he was at his best, and he should have been doing that 100% of the time and not any of the other racist stuff. What I think is really super fascinating for this person who undoubtedly was, you know, thought of himself as, I mean, we get this idea of like auteur from people like Wagner, who was just like, you know, spearheading this massive project and was just calling the shots on everything. Surprisingly, this idea of Gesamtkunstwerk is actually about integrating the arts from all of these various disciplines to the point of basically subsuming and integrating the individual contribution towards this holistic artistic statement. That's not just mine, it's not just yours, it's all of ours together, which I think is like so important for this idea of public art. And as I said before, this idea of like audience completes the picture. So anyway, just to kind of like think of some historical touch points for this idea, really help me understand what that means. I certainly can't speak to the idea of access necessarily, but stand out for me, it means for me collaboration. Like, I am not the artist in a public artwork. It's me plus other people, and that's been my experience from the start. Involving interactive works that involve audience. It's me working with other people in other disciplines to realize this larger kind of shared vision that's not individual, but a group effort. And again, involving that audience component as well, so critical.
Well, I probably should throw back some questions here.
Yeah.
Yes. What is, why is there a limit between popular art and academic art, and what is the bridge to communicate both of them? And why, I mean, our commercial world and capitalism makes it like there's certain type of music and certain type of things, and the experimentation that was happening like in the 60s and all of that is all diluted. I don't see my students sometimes with the energy to experiment and to try something new. Everybody wants to do what they're hearing in the radio or what they're seeing in the commercials and all of that. And my question is like how to open a channel of communication between us that are academically trained and the people. No?
Well, I have to say, I got to know you because of this event. And I happened upon a performance that you did, I think during COVID. It was a virtual concert. You know, again, another form of public art and shared. You unfortunately don't get to experience people's reaction in real time to that. But, you know, it's not really, I guess, an answer to that, but it made me think of that piece that I heard, and I was hoping you could go more into it. It was called Sonic Borders, and Guillermo's builds instruments out of found objects. I mean, one of many things you do. And these were artifacts that I think you personally found, or yeah, along the US-Mexico border, and related to actual people, I think, that had been in that area, yes. And fascinating instruments, percussive things, string instruments with animal vertebrae, it looked like, on the strings. And there was one, a tennis shoe that you had scraping gravel, you know, so very visceral and, you know, just images coming to mind even hearing these sounds. But I was hoping to ask you more about that. I know it's not an answer to your question, but your process and your experience with that, and any kind of like public art notion in that concept.
Well, I started with a notion that many cultures and many in the world, African cultures, Latin American cultures, there's no separation between art and life. And that's very important. And one of my influences to make these, what I call sonic devices, I don't call them instruments because the word is charged. And it's the Mesoamerican idea and the Native American idea of objects being part of your journey in life. Whatever you touch or whatever is around you, your clothes, the glass that you use to drink water, everything is part of your journey. And it's not an art object, is part of your journey. So I decided to go to the Mexico-US border and pick up things that immigrant people leave there when they cross the border in order to literally ritualize and communicate with those people whose subjects were a part of their lives. They may be incarcerated, they may be dead, they may have returned. And with the question, what do you take with yourself when you leave your country, your family, your things, and what do you take with you? So I thought that each of these subjects speaks from their perspective of the experience. And in different from what we see in the Western world. We find a tree, we cut the tree, we make a violin, and we force the violin to produce certain notes. This is the other way around. You find the object and you see the sound that this object can make, and you listen to the sound. And that took me to make music that was literally sometimes dissonant and everything. But it's very interesting because I used to make music in the academic world that was dissonant, and people would like tell me, I don't understand that, you have to explain to me. And I make the same music with these subjects, and everybody's like, wow, I was in the desert and I saw this and
That's because you had a story ready.
exactly. There you go. That's the storytelling. There you go. So a couple of times I have two Native American women coming and to me after my ritual performance, and they said, this one said, I want you to know this woman. They're a medicine woman, and they say we saw spirits moving around you and dancing around you when, and it's happened several times. So this is the thing when music and art become more than art and become more like a communal experience. And that's what I'm experiencing these days, and I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Saw you take some notes, Seth. I don't know if you want to.
I guess I just keep coming back to this idea of like ephemerality, and it's this is my own like hang up, I guess. For a long time, one of my interests, as like this is not public art, but as one of my like composerly interests was to write pieces that were not fixed in their notation. You know what I mean? Like the notation was like already written down. Instead, I was using the computer and technology to generate the notation, the score in the moment as a performer is playing. And so every time they're playing the piece, it's similar but not the same. It's newly created and it's reactive and interactive to how they're playing and what they're playing. As a short example, a piece that I wrote for this fantastic pianist in LA named Vicky Ray involved this like evaluation of how she played. It was almost game-like in its construction. She would play what was on the score or on the page on it was a screen, and then it would say, the computer would say, how well did you do? And I'm gonna give you a score. If you did badly, it will make the music easier for you, right? And then, of course, then she will do a better performance because the music's easier on the next page, and then it's, oh, you did great. Here's a harder bit of music to play. And so it has this kind of like cyclical feedback component to it. And what I found really exciting about this idea was that the music was ephemeral. Like that one performance that you heard was the only performance that was exactly that way, that there was sort of a multiplicity of states that represented the final, the piece. And I think that kind of thinking, this piece is, years ago, this kind of thinking has really opened me up to this idea of public art or art meant for audience interaction, because there is no one kind of representative state of the work. The work is continually like asking for input and giving various outputs. I find that extremely compelling. Like I did an installation a couple years ago that involved, and this is so simple, folks, it's just 4 giant knobs where there's no instructions. The audience just sees a big knob and you walk up and you turn it, and it scans through radio stations. And so this is such an old idea. This is like, I'm such a John Cage, fan. I mean, this is music from the late 50s and 60s that was open-ended and invited that kind of participation, and it viewed all possible sounds as potential to be viewed as art, which is what I've come to embrace. But this idea of this open-ended, ephemeral state, I find really attractive. And at the same time, this like that nagging part of you that says, you're not an artist, you don't know what you're doing, like you're not really like playing with everybody else, like you're doing your own thing, tells me that like public art is like permanent, and it's funded by big donors, and it exists outside of building, and so there is a bit of a I guess I'm on the one hand a bit envious of that, but at the same time I'm doubtful that like the permanence really is an important component. Would you mind talking about that?
I would just want to say that I think it's so important to figure out ways, if we're going to call it the ephemeral, for that to be present in the public space, because it engages people in a very different way. So although the kind of work that I've done in bringing artists and young people together is very much storytelling based, like I said, and it's easy to make objects, whether it's a moving object, a film, or a still image, or whatever it is, I think there's, every time I read about a project that is a storytelling-based project, often dealing with a social issue or theme, I am aware that that's not all that it needs to be, and that people in communities should have the opportunity to engage with artists and the ways in which artists think and make art. And that's a much more, so it's not that artists who make that kind of art and think that way and are more conceptual in their approach don't belong in the public space. I think the pressure is on, whether it's governmental or nonprofits or whomever it is who is engaged, to be able to find ways to lift up that opportunity. Because, and I just also want to say that Pauline Oliveros this is not quite related, but my first experience as someone working with sound at the Los Angeles Women's Building. And it was really a profound experience for me. I would be one of those people who go like, I don't get it, but her process was so interactive. So it opened up the way in which I thought about sound and expression and creativity. And so I think that's a really interesting challenge. How do you embed that in community in a public way and integrate that into public art practices?
I'll just jump in because there was some people were asking, like, Pauline Oliveros, who's that? Just as a quick anecdote to maybe understand a little bit, because clearly that's a big influence for all three of us. She developed this practice, like Guillermo said, that's called deep listening, but she did a lot of text-based scores, which were like actions to participate. So she presented it as music, but it would say something like, walk so softly that your feet become ears. So it's like so evocative, and there's no barrier for entry, right? It doesn't say, first, learn how to play the violin for 20 years, right? It's none of that. It's anybody can participate. And I was listening to an interview where she was kind of speaking about public art, and I love this phrase that she says, that she's talking about in terms of involving the public. It's about composing attention, which I thought was so evocative, right? It's this idea that it's not about writing the notes, it's about focusing our attention. Later in that interview, she speaks about the trance of technology and how she's trying to get us out of that trance in her work by focusing our ears inward and listening to our heartbeat, our pulse, our breath, but also starting to listen to each other, to the people next to us, the sounds that we're making. They're not necessarily musical sounds, but they could be, right? There's potential there. And then I think importantly for public art too, she really emphasizes listening not only to yourself, not only to your neighbors who are making sound, but also the space. What is the space telling us? And in public art, that's key, right? This is site specific, and it's we could think about the composition of this space, the physical dimensions, the materials on the walls, floors, and ceilings, the acoustic kind of properties of, standing waves or nodes of those standing waves, and how they maybe imply the sounds or the art that should be made in this space. I just find that super fascinating. I just want to throw that out there, who was Pauline Oliveros and why are we talking about her?
Yeah, you should all check her out and listen to her. That's how, when I met my husband, he introduced me to her. So now we talked a lot about public art. What is it? Different forms. I want to kind of dig into the next layer, and that is, how can it foster a sense of collective belonging and or cultural identity? I want to switch to Lynn now. A specific question for you. Fascinated with your background in clinical psychology and how you combine that knowledge with your interest in creativity and how that can foster a sense of well-being. And I think many of us recognize, and I think even scientists recognize, that the role of belonging or the role of belonging on your health is almost equally important to air, water, and food. So I'm just curious about your reflections on creative expression and the work you've done with others to create a sense of belonging. And all of you, please feel free to answer that.
Well, let me put it first in the public art context, which is that a good public art project, in my point of view, or installation or series of community activities or whatnot, are those that find ways to find multiple entry points for people depending on who they are and their interests. I think about a major public art project on Venice Beach, which is where I live, off of the boardwalk, and it included space for graffiti artists because of the city's tearing down of a building that was called the Graffiti Pit, so a place where people could continue to come and make graffiti art. And it included other kind of recreational elements as well. But it started with many contentious, granted, meetings with the designers and community members, design charrettes. It was a very, very involved and engaged community process with community members who are really invested in their neighborhood, having the opportunity to respond to, the designs that were being suggested, had opportunities to be members of the group that determined which artists were going to be making art for the public space, which includes mainly mosaic and poetry that's etched into some of the concrete facility structures on the beach. That ties it to local artists, and the poetry to a local poetry organization as well. And then, as I said, with the walls left for the graffiti pit, giving this kind of ongoing opportunity for young people in particular, but not only, to be able to continue to make that particular form of visual art. Providing that space where, assuming, let me back up a second, assuming that community members have the intelligence and curiosity to engage in the arts and to connect with one another, builds a really strong sense of community, even if it's a micro-community, of neighborhood, of pride in neighborhood, and that kind of thing. The other thing I would say, just you were talking about scientists talking about the importance of belonging, people are really looking also at neuroaesthetics, like what is that relationship between the creative process and our brain, and how essential creativity is and expression is to our human experience.
Which is fascinating because we're consumers so much now with our devices and very little time and space to create our own
Right.
thoughts and ideas, not to
Well,
jump
and
in
I was
there,
thinking
but-
about that relative to the history lesson you gave us,
Mm-hmm.
which was fabulous. But I was thinking about, some of the examples that you gave. What did it mean that there wasn't the ability to consume in the way that we do in our contemporary culture? I mean, how much did that have to do with what happened in culture, that art, how central art had to be, really, right?
And
to
sing
culture
together. I was thinking about, people do that in religious settings, singing together, but it's like the best feeling, any of you singers out there, to create harmony with one another, and it's like an immediate sense of kinship and community and belonging. Even we were at a concert the other day, and we were asked to sing out loud, and somebody next to me hit a really nice tone, and we looked at each other and just hugged. I didn't even know this guy. But and we're lacking, I think, many of those opportunities. Just to jump in
The conundrum is, how do you recreate that in the culture that we currently live in, and especially obviously over the last 2 decades, in terms of and I'm guilty as well, our primary attention being connected to the online space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more thought? I know we covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah, I don't have anything interesting to like add to that. Besides, you've probably been at some of these other panels yesterday, and one of them, I don't have the stats on this, but it just the key word stuck out to me. This idea of the loneliness epidemic being taken as seriously as other epidemics that are happening. They have such a major impact on our health in the same way that like smoking or whatever it happens to be. And I guess.
Just about loneliness, Yes, there it goes. Just to say that from, so when the data started to come up, when the data was starting to be shared and talked about and whatnot, to me and many of my peers in the art space, in the community art space, were like, yeah, of course, But I haven't seen a lot of people talking about how the arts can serve as a vehicle for helping to solve that problem of profound loneliness, and it should be, because there are what a way to bring people together and also to have people express again their essential humanity, as I was saying earlier. So,
What I would say is, because these are such huge problems, I don't know. I can't even. I can't think about it because it's honestly debilitating. I think what I have found myself doing more and more, first of all, I've focused less on me as an artist and more as an educator and trying to enable students. And I've had such fantastic students that I'd like to just share just briefly a little bit about some of the work that they've done, because I think that to maybe somewhat move this forward in terms of addressing your question, I think the only impact I can have is like person to person, and seeing the students kind of light up and kind of get this idea has been the only meaningful change that I've seen. And so I'll speak just very briefly. A number of years ago, I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, working there at the university, and a lot of university music and art making culture is very insular. It's very inside our walls. And I was trying so hard to break us out of that. And what broke us out was a community partner coming up and saying, hey, do you want to start a music festival? I was like, okay, yeah, that was not on my radar, but okay. And so she pitched it to me. She said, there's a group of disenfranchised musicians in our community that like to make something called, and I don't know what this is, noise music? I was like, oh, okay, all right. And up until this point, I had been, experimenting with ways to get my students to kind of break out of their kind of conventional spaces and try some new things, to experiment themselves, and was just running into brick walls. And suddenly, I just got handed this like secret cheat code to getting my students to experiment, and it was by not calling it music, it was calling it noise. And this was such a delightful surprise that we went from, let's do some experimental music and just like, resistance, to, can you make some noise? Here's a 9-volt battery and a speaker cone, connect them. And it's just, suddenly it becomes play, it becomes playful. And so what we did in the context of that, that whole endeavor was we enabled the students to organize the music festival, to help curate the artists that were invited. We wrote a grant together that paid the invited artists to come. We organized 3 stages. We had community partners at 2 different venues. One was like a mobile stage, which was way cool. Mm-hmm. And then this very DIY art space. And then we involved this community noise music group to like basically partner with us. And we activated this, I would describe it as a, not as well-to-do Omaha neighborhood. And we brought, upwards of 2,000 people to descend on this neighborhood on a First Fridays, like art walk. They were like injecting money into the economy, and they were, basically getting hit by walls of noise. My students were performing it. They were running all of the AV for it. And it was just, the event itself was glorious, but the after effects of it, I think what actually matters was that of that, students continued to play in the bands that they had formed on their own, which is great. So they're continuing making art. We have solo performers that come out of that, that graduate, and now they're like touring and doing their own noise music or beyond acts. Students got, like many of my students got jobs from that, from the venues, from the people who work at the local stagehand union. And I think just this broader community awareness of like, hey, our city actually is not super weird and insular, but instead, like, we have these amazing people that are here and ready to express themselves. And I just think that, like, the only change that we can affect is the person who's standing right there. You know, as an artist or as an artist educator, it's like, I can only do that. And it may be a small change, but it's like it's actual change. And I find that hopeful.
It's funny because a question came in and you just answered it, I think, somewhat. But I'd love to get Guillermo's take on this as well. And it's pretty much what you said, but maybe in a broader sense. So the question is, in a capitalist society, I notice how the incentives for younger generations to create art are distorted. So it's based around monetization, performativity, creation of products. So these motivations are, I guess you can't, they're saying not intrinsic, but, you know, not of that pure sense of art making creativity. And I know, Guillermo, you work with students also, I think you said. How can we shift the perceived incentives and create spaces that encourage younger people to see the value in art in and of itself?
Well, I think that Seth's example is very good. I think it's very important to make the students and the non-musicians, non-artists to conceive the world in a different way, to name things differently, and to see things differently. I'm reading this thing about Isis, the goddess, and the power of Isis, the Egyptian goddess, was she's not the goddess, but she's the throne. So there's more power in the throne than there is in the goddess. If there's no throne, there's no goddess. So this is very interesting because she knew the secret name of Ra. And I see this as seeing the secret name of things, to reconceive what is a cell phone, to reconceive what is music, to make things, to see things in a meta way, outside of what it is in our normal lives, in our common lives. And that, I think, it's a very important thing to break the boundaries that are set by our system, our consumer system, and take art away from being just a commodity or just an entertainment, but more of a form of life, more of a way of life. So that's my
I'd like to just add that in the work that I do, which is media-based, the challenge is really very significant because young people think they already know know how to do this. They know how to create videos. They know how to make images. They post them all the time. They are quite attached to their tools. And so one thing that we do, and that is central to our program, is that, and when we're training artists, which usually we're training artists to be educators, they usually come to us not as educators, is what does it mean to center creativity across the curriculum so that the tool becomes just that, a tool around which they become very sophisticated users, but because they're increasing their knowledge of how to use the tool in order to express their creative ideas. And that's a very, and that just required an insistence on all artists to the degree we could insist on it, engaging with young people in that way. They can play with the cameras, they can play with the sound equipment, et cetera, but when they're actually making work, we're interested in their idea development. We're interested in developing their sense of aesthetics. We're interested in having other artists come in who might inspire them in some unique and unexpected ways. So that's a big issue for those of us who are working in the media space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question? Just,
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier, and I think some of your work really speaks to this too. This idea, like, do you think that the prevalence of digital tools, whether used by artists or like just kind of digital culture and the prevalence of that in just like everyday life, do you think that's hurting participatory art? And I'm thinking like the work that you described, the non-instrument, these sound makers that are so, they're just so acoustic, right? They're not even analog. They're just these acoustic things, and yet they can evoke such powerful connection with people. But the allure that like the trance of technology, like Paulin Oliveros was talking about, I feel like I don't know, is technology helping or hurting like the participatory aspect of it?
It creates a challenge, is what I would say. So I think that, and that challenge has to do with kind of helping young people to release from the addiction and get into their own process and their own creative flow. And that is, it's not that tricky a thing actually necessarily, especially if the artists who are engaging them are really reflecting on their own personal practices. Yeah, so I would say it's a challenge, and probably figuring out how to let young people know that the experience they're going to have in this particular environment is going to be different than the ways they already use those tools, and that's a bit challenging as well. Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking of a piece that I don't like to talk that much about my work, but I was commissioned a piece by the Kronos Quartet, and they asked me, I said I wanted to make an audience participatory piece, and they say, what do everybody has that makes sound? So everybody has a cell phone. So I created these 4 tracks that you can download, and people walk around with the cell phones with a string quartet, and they are tracks on video games, war sounds, cockpit recordings, and all of that. And in a way, everybody's fascinating that they are creating the sound. People can speak, people can do whatever, things that you cannot do in a concert hall. And they walk around, and the sound, the wall of sound that creates around the quartet is just fascinating. People love the piece. And at the same time, it's a statement. We're all participating in these war games, with our technology, with our things. And we're part of it at the same time, and we're a community. So it's a very different way to see a telephone that you use, or a cell phone that you use all day and everything. You're not going to be browsing. You're just creating sound and walking around.
We're getting close to the end, but a couple of questions. So how can we see here Art of Found Objects? I found by just Googling his name, honestly, and found your pieces. So, I encourage all of you to do that for everyone here. There's fascinating archives online. Also, Pauline Oliveros, somebody asked for the spelling, it's Oliveros. And I just, I kind of want to end with, there's something in your bio, Seth, that jumped out at me. And I feel like it touches upon, because we were talking about belonging, a sense of belonging, and there's like cultural belonging, there's like really specific belonging among people who share an art form and that sort of thing. And then there's just the very generalized human belonging of like, oh, I can identify with that. And that is, so part of your process, as I understand it, is to you're looking for opportunities to explore ephemerality and multiplicity in live performance. This often involves performance situations that have limited or impossible rehearsal scenarios, purposeful impediments to ensemble coordination, live sight reading, and unavoidable failure. Who amongst us is not afraid of failure? And you just throw it out there. So yeah, I just find that wonderful. And one last, we have a couple of minutes, maybe just, each of you an example of an experience you've had, either it was your own artwork or some other person's artwork that did create this wonderful sense of like human belonging? And you don't have to answer either, but I don't know, Guillermo, does one come to mind for you? Maybe.
I've been making this piece. I was not very much of a community arts person, and it grew on me a lot, especially working on in social justice and all of that and community. But I do these workshops that is about chanting, and nobody needs to know anything. Everybody thinks that for singing you need to know how to sing, and it's just emulating long tones and studying the architecture of the place where you are, the reverberation, the resonance. And I took the resonance idea as something that could be taken as a metaphor, resonance. We resonate. How do we resonate with each other, And I think that's a very important thing for me. That's the experience, to resonate with each other in any way.
That's lovely, as we are today.
Yeah, I would say too, it's remarkable how similar my experience was too. I mean, we're both musicians, so there's a bias there. But I was leading an exercise, again, this is a piece by Pauline Oliveros, with some students in preparation for doing a big project that was an outdoor sound art festival that we were running. We commissioned artists. It was, this is the outworking from that noise music festival. It's like, what can we do next? It's addicting to involve the community in that way. And I was trying to prepare them to be a kind of open yourself. And we did this exercise. I believe the name of the piece by Oliveros is called Tuning Exercise or something like this. You probably know it. It's you gather with a large group of people, you take a breath, you open your mouth, and you sing any note that comes out.
Can we try it?
Yeah, we should try.
We have more time than I thought we did, so thank you
Oh,
for
sure.
correcting me.
So the second part of the instructions is you just hold that note. But as you're singing, you're not listening to yourself, you're listening to a neighbor. And you're trying to internalize, what are they singing? What are they singing? And then as you run out of your breath, you stop, you think about the pitch that your neighbor sang, and you take a breath, and you sing that pitch. And you just do this. It might be too long to get to the end point here, but I mean, how much time do we have?
We have 8 minutes.
Okay. Well,
We don't have to go that long.
yeah. Well, it's up to
Maybe
you.
just try it. What do you think? You want to try it? Yeah.
I'm gonna turn off my mic. Yeah, do you want me to lead this? I'm gonna go like this. I'm gonna go, and you're gonna take a breath. I'll lead us this way. I'll go, and then we'll sing a pitch, and then you'll sing it, but you're listening to someone else. When you run out of breath, take a little breather, and then sing that pitch that you heard your neighbor sing, and then just kind of repeat until Melissa cuts us off. Just like that. That's enough. Ready? Okay. So I'll go, and then we'll sing. Ready?
That was
Okay.
beautiful.
Okay.
Wow.
Nice job.
Sound has a
How-
vibration. I mean, that's what yeah.
I know we don't normally do questions this way, but how did that feel? Good?
Yeah.
Yeah? You
I mean,
liked it?
what
Awesome.
happened? Just to name it, what happened? Yeah, I guess it's in the name of it. Yeah.
I saw you listening to someone.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. And it takes it outside of you and it becomes more about the other people. And your body is just part of this larger sounding organism that is resonating with the space and with each other. And it's such a like communal experience, right? And it's,
For the next 4 minutes.
I feel like you're gonna throw a wrench in it, aren't you? You're gonna like, let's see what happens.
Also,
but
what
it's open to that, right? It's open to like dissenters, and doesn't that reflect kind of our larger experience of community too? That we don't always harmonize, but like we can still, if we're focusing on not ourselves but each other, it can create a sense of belonging. Yeah.
And also the notion of because we're all listening to each other, it's like, am I making the tone sound good, or what should it sound like? And it kind of touches upon your work with objects. You start with the object and then you play it, and I don't know if you know the group Roomful of Teeth, but it's this choral group, and their sonic language is so out there. So like these crazy sounds. And somebody even asked a question about Bulgarian singing. It's a totally different way that we use our voice, but to get to that place where everything is okay, everything's acceptable, just kind of expressing yourself. We veered off topic a little bit. Any last? 5 minutes. Okay. Oh my goodness.
Extending our time.
I know, right? Yeah. Somebody asked about architecture, which is kind of interesting. It's definitely an art form, public art form, and. Funny, like, why is architecture in Boulder so boring? But it does touch upon like who's in charge, who's making those decisions, and this sort of private public kind of art. Anybody have any thoughts about that? I know that's not really our expertise, planning, but
Well, it's obvious. Architecture defines the way we move, the way we relate to each other. Architecture is everything. We live inside architecture constantly. And it's right, like who decides what the architecture is going to be and what it's going to be for. Mm-hmm. And in that way, it's totally an art form. I mean, it designs our lives. We live inside architecture.
I had this thought to myself. We have a Creative Nations, Indigenous Collective of Artists Theory, and in interacting and even putting together an exhibition, you talked about community of like the creators and the participants, and not just the artists, but hanging art on the wall and talking with one another. And I got to thinking, like, what if colonization had not happened here? What would the architecture look like? What would the governmental structure look like? What would commerce and even money look like? So yeah, we kind of take it for granted that a building should be tall and rectangular and with a pointy roof or whatever, but yeah, and there's other cultures, it looks very different. Shapes.
Yes, they say that Tenochtitlan, the original Mexico City, Aztec city, was like Venice. It was full of channels and really advanced systems of irrigation and all of that. And when the Spaniards came with their horses, they covered all of the lake so that their horses could cross. And they like literally filled out the lake, the whole lake. And that's why when there's earthquakes in Mexico, everything just falls into pieces. So it's a very interesting, now that you're saying about colonization and all of that, how colonization can change the concept of land and the concept of space.
Right, and the railroad industry, just creating lines across, doesn't matter if there's a hill in the way or a river. It's cheaper to go over it, than to build around it, yeah. Well, any final remarks anyone wants to say? This has been a wonderful conversation, a participatory public art with all of you and singing. Thank you for being a wonderful audience, and thank you so much to each of you, your time and your energy and your thoughts. And yes, thank you.